ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmat Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Parama Guru Bhyo Namaha, Asmat Sarva Guru Bhyo Namaha. So we're continuing on with our reading of the Vedanta by Dr. V.S. Gate. And we finished the introduction, and now we're starting on the first chapter. Chapter 1, General Outline. So the word Vedanta signifies literally in Sanskrit the end of the Veda. In common use, however, the word is used with reference to the concluding portions of the Vedic literature known as the Upanishads. The name Vedanta is applied to all the 5 systems of philosophy going under the names of Shankara, Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Madhva, and Vallabha. And some others. There are some others also, which are not covered in this book. Because all of these 5 systems alike lay claim to their being specially and directly derived from the Vedanta. Really speaking, the other 5 orthodox schools, right, also pretend to derive their support from the Upanishads. So there are 6 schools, of 6 original schools of Vedic, let's say Vedic knowledge, Nyaya Vaisheshika, Yoga Sankhya, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa, of course, is called Vedanta. Purva Mimamsa sometimes is called Karmakanda. So thus, for example, the Nyaya and Vaisheshika schools quote passages from the Upanishads in support of their particular dogmas, especially when they are treating of the nature and attributes of the soul, or of the difference of nature between Ishvara, God, and the inanimate world, matter. Above all, the Sankhyas, a very old and influential school, many of whose dogmas are accepted even by the Vedanta, and whose general influence is clearly seen throughout the philosophical literature of India, are seen to make a very great use of the passages from the Upanishads, though it may be noticed here that even according to themselves, their mainstay is not the Upanishads, but reasoning, pure and simple. It is quite evident from the fact that all the Vedanta writers take great pains to refute the Sankhya doctrine, especially to show that those particular passages, which are quoted by the Sankhyas in their own support, if properly and rightly interpreted, lend the least support to their doctrine. But we cannot, of course, speak of the heterodox schools like the Bauddhas, the Buddhists, and the Jainas or Jains in their connection. There's also another heterodox school called the Charvakas, the Indian materialist school. Because although from the very nature of the Upanishads, a support can be found in them for the most varied doctrines possible, and as a matter of fact, a number of passages may be pointed out which would be favorable to the Buddhistic doctrine. Still, these schools never lay even the most distant claim to their being derived from the Upanishads. Not only that, but they even directly oppose their authority, the Upanishadic authority. Nevertheless, the term Vedanta applies only to the Uttaramimamsa and the various schools which it comprises. And there are solid reasons for this restricted application of the term. First of all, no other school makes as much use of the Upanishads as does Uttaramimamsa. So, Purva Mimamsa, Uttaramimamsa. Purva means the first, coming first. Uttara means coming later. And Mimamsa simply means a discussion or deliberation. So we could say that Uttaramimamsa, we could call it the ultimate deliberation. Every small item of their doctrine must be based upon and fully illustrated by passages from the Upanishads. The most important reason, however, is that according to them, Shruti, or the revelation, is the highest authority, that is the Vedic texts, the Upanishads. Nay, in fact, almost the only means of arriving at right knowledge. And this follows, they say, from the very nature of the subject they have to deal with. For in fact, the chief aim of philosophy, according to the Uttamimamsa, is to find out the truth about the nature of the world, of its cause, of the soul, about the meaning of birth and death, in a word, to arrive at that right knowledge which would bring about the highest eternal bliss. Reason, pure and simple, shushka tarka, would not help us in the least to achieve this end. Indeed, truth can be only one and not many, while reason, being subjective, brings us to several and divergent conclusions regarding the truth for which we're making a search. And there is no means of deciding whose reasoning is more correct, because each reasoner apparently pretends to be infallible and to follow the scientific canons of argument. Thus, we have to resort to the Shruti, or the revealed scriptures, and reasoning, being only subordinate, is valid only as long as it conforms to the Shruti. Moreover, reasoning apart from the ridiculous variety of conclusions to which it may lead in accordance with nature and prejudices of the person reasoning, is very limited in its scope and cannot take us to the end of our inquiry. It can proceed only to a certain stage, and then we have to make certain assumptions. Well, why not then assume what is told most authoritatively in Shruti? Thus, it is that the term Vedanta is restricted to the Uttamimamsa only, in distinction from Sankhya and Nyaya, which take their main stand on tarka, or reasoning, logical, reasoning, and resort to Shruti only when convenient. The Upanishads are beyond question the highest authority as far as the Vedanta and the schools which claim their name, this name, are concerned. But this is only this is not the only authority. If reasoning is set aside, or rather subordinated, because it is many-faced, that is, leads to conclusions mutually opposed, the case is not any better with the Upanishads. From their very natures, one and the same passage can be interpreted in more than one way. And moreover, there are passages which are opposed to each other in their purport. Thus, for instance, in one place it is said that there was existence in the beginning. In another place it is said that there was non-existence in the beginning. In one place it is said that all is intelligence, which is one and unique. And in another place, on the other hand, there's a reference to two persons, one of whom eats and the other only looks on. This is a famous analogy of the two birds in the tree, one of them eating fruit, one of them looking on, referring to the soul and the supersoul within the body. Once it is said that Brahman created Akasha, or the element of ether, to begin with. Again, it is said that Brahman first created Teja, or the element of light. If truth is one, and it is this assumption that is at the root of all philosophical controversies, what shall we do with such mutually contradictory passages? There are many attempts made to evolve a system from the complex and varied passages of the Upanishads. And the one attempt which has come down to us is embodied in what is known as the Brahma Sutras, traditionally attributed to Badarayana or Vyasa, believed to be the same as the author of the Mahabharata. So some people say that Badarayana, who wrote the Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras, is a different person from the Vedavyasa, who compiled the Puranas and the Mahabharata, the Itihasa and the Puranas. But others believe that he's one and the same person. So we have said that there are many more of such attempts before, and there are some good reasons for it. In the collection of sutras before us, we find several times references to other writers and to their views on some important dogmas. Thus, for instance, in Adhikarana 6 of Adhyaya 1, Pada 4, Sutras 19 to 22, the question is raised how, in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 4, 5, 6, the individual soul, which is first spoken of in its particular nature as being the one for of whose pleasure everything is ultimately dear, is in just the next sentence spoken of as the highest self that is to be meditated upon and realized. So let's just explain a couple of words here. Adhikarana means, in the Brahma Sutras, the word adhikarana means a subject. There are different topics that are taken up in the Brahma Sutras. Basically, Brahma Sutras are in 4 chapters, and the chapters are referred to here as adhyaya. Adhyaya means chapter in Sanskrit. Adhikarana means the subjects within the chapters. And a subject may take up several sutras, of which there may be a purva paksha, an opening statement, which is an incorrect understanding. And then there'll be some discussion about that. And then there'll be a proposition, and there'll be for and against arguments, and finally a siddhanta, or a final conclusion to a topic. So here, pada also refers to a section here. So first, in Adhikarana 6 means the sixth subject in Adhyaya 1. Adhyaya 1 is the first chapter. The 4 chapters of Brahma Sutras basically deal with what is supreme, what is Brahman, right? The first chapter. The second is what is not Brahman, right? What is not the supreme. And the third is how to attain Brahman, how to attain liberation. And the fourth is the goal, or what is attained in the state of liberation, or about liberation. So that's basically how it's divided up into 4 chapters. Now, there are subjects within each chapter. And so the 6th Adhikarana in the first chapter, it will be dealing with, because it's the first chapter, we know it's dealing with an explanation of what is Brahman, what is the supreme. Pada 4, Sutras 19 to 22. So these are all, and amongst the main commentators, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva, they actually slightly disagree on how many they have. The text is fixed of the Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras, but they disagree sometimes on how the sutras are broken up, and how the adhikaranas, what sutras belong to what discussions of what topics, and whether a sutra is the siddhanta, is giving the actual answer, or whether it's simply a purva paksha, an initial statement giving a wrong answer. So this is where the interpretation comes in. And the commentaries of the different acharyas on the Vedanta Sutras basically are quoting the Upanishadic texts, which have to deal with those different subjects, those different adhikaranas. So anyway, moving on. This identification is the identification of the soul as either or the Atman as being the supreme, or being an infinitely small individual of unlimited numbers, can be seen in different Upanishadic statements. So this identification is explained in several ways, and not less than 3 views have been referred to. According to Ashmaratya, and he's talking about other commenters on the Upanishads who are mentioned in Brahma Sutras. According to Ashmaratya, this is an indication of the fulfillment of the promise made in the subsequent sentence that by the knowledge of the self, everything without exception becomes known. For otherwise, if the individual soul is different from Brahman, how is this promise possible? According to Odolomi, however, the reason for the identification in question is that really the individual soul, which loses its purity of nature by contact with the limiting adjuncts, such as the body, the sense organs, etc., regains its purity by the practice of such means as knowledge and meditation, etc., and thus becomes identical in nature with Brahman, or the Supreme, in the course of its going up from this body, or going out of this body, or passing away. Finally, according to Kasha Krishna, it is the Paramatman, or the Supreme Self, right, himself, who becomes the individual soul when proceeding to evolve name and form. And so the identification is quite justifiable. Many more instances of this kind could be pointed out, but although there may have existed other similar collections of sutras than the Vedanta Sutras, the only one available to us is the one by Badarayana. So just as so we have different schools of philosophy, at which even Ramanuja talks about Dramita, Tanka, Bodhayana, Karpadi, different people who have given commentaries about spiritual subjects coming before him, but they were all of their writings were eclipsed by Shankara. So Ramanuja mentions that. So we know that there were other understandings of the Upanishads, maybe other sutras even, by some people, but they became lost, or they went out of vogue, or they became eclipsed by Shankara, Ramanuja, by these great Vedantins. Thus, in addition to the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras form the second great authority of the Vedanta schools. So, as we know, there's a statement. There's a system of the Prasthana Traya or Prasthana Trayi. Traya means three, or Traya means three, and there are three main texts that the Vedantins look to for knowledge, and of course, the ultimate is the Upanishads, which are part of the Veda, the Shruti. But the Vedanta Sutras themselves become important in proving certain things. And so they're taken as part of this three primary texts of philosophy of the Vedanta school. And the third one is the Gita, which is a part of the Mahabharata, the Itihasa of the Mahabharata. So all the great acharyas, all the great schools that we're talking about here, Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, Nimbarka, Ballabha, etc., and even the Chaitanya school, the Gaudiya school, they've all written commentaries, not only on the Vedanta Sutras, but also on the Upanishads directly, and also on the Bhagavad Gita from the Mahabharata, and in fact, another part of the Mahabharata too, the Vishnu Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Vishnu. So you'll find all of the schools have written commentaries on all those texts. So literally, these are called the Prasthana Traya, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, and the Bhagavad Gita. And to a lesser extent, the Vishnu Sahasranam. A sutra collection as a source and authority of a philosophical doctrine is not peculiar to Vedanta alone. So we know that. We know that there are Dharma Sutras, Brahma Sutras, Kama Sutras. There are Pingala Chandra Sutras. There was a certain time in Sanskrit literature, a historical time, when everything was put into sutras. And this basically came about because you had people writing on certain subjects, and the written knowledge became so vast that nobody could read all of the commentaries and all of the expansions of knowledge in a lifetime, and they needed to make things compact again and easily. So to summarize all of the knowledge in different fields, they would make sutras, which are little, very small aphorisms, which a person could even memorize, which wouldn't tell you the whole story, but which could be easily memorized and easily gone through. And then people started to write commentaries on the sutras. So there was a sutra period in Sanskrit, in the history of Sanskrit literature. And so many different subjects were made into sutras. Okay, were summarized in sutras, let's say. So they're not peculiar to Vedanta alone, for we know that the other five orthodox schools also, right? The other five, what are they? Yoga, Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, and Purva Mimamsa, or Kamakanda. Also, all of them claim to be based upon sutra collections attributed to some sage of mythical fame, supposed to be the originator of the doctrine in question. So besides these two, the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras, all the Vedanta systems claim to have the authority of the third great fountain of knowledge, so popularly known as Srimad Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of God. Each of the 5 schools of Vedanta believes that its particular doctrine is the only one contained not only in the Upanishads and the Sutras, but also in the Gita. Thus, the Upanishads and the Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita are known as the 3 prasthanas, or starting points, from which proceed the different Vedanta doctrines. And so, of the so-called founders of the systems, have written commentaries on the Upanishads, at least the principal ones, the Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. Of these, we are here only concerned with the commentaries on the Brahma Sutras. So in this book, he's not going to delve into the different commentaries by the different acharyas on the Gita or on the Upanishads directly, but only on the Brahma Sutras. If the Upanishads, by reason of their very nature, in that they contain free thoughts and attempts at guessing the truths most freely expressed, without the slightest notion of systematizing, can be interpreted in more than one way, the sutras present in a still greater degree is this character. So in other words, so we were just talking about how original Upanishadic statements seem to be contradictory sometimes, or present some different ways of looking at things. And so what about the sutras? Well, the sutras themselves sometimes seem contradictory, or seem to be presenting their knowledge in a different way. So in fact, they're very brief notes, these sutras, right? Rather than sentences, consisting of as few words as possible, many words having been supplied from the context. There is thus the greatest scope for the ingenuity of the commentator, who can accordingly find in them whatever ideas he wants to convey. Okay, so the whole idea of a sutra is that it should be, when you create a sutra, or you make a sutra, or write a sutra, the idea is to use as few words as possible to get across the basic essence of your idea. And so there's a statement in Sanskrit, matra lagava matram pudrotsavaha, that a person who can shorten a rule or shorten a sutra, even by one syllable, is as happy as if he just had a son born to him. So it's very happy. Putrotsavaha means putra utsavaha. He's a festival that one has when he has a child born to him. So the sutra literature in India presents a phenomenon met nowhere else. The desire to express as much meaning as possible in as few words as possible, and to provide most convenient and compressed manuals, which could be easily committed to memory, and at the same time, which would easily bring to mind the complete sense by applying to them, as it were, certain keys of interpretation, was sometimes carried too far, so that instead of attaining the intended purpose, it often produced the contrary results. Thus, for instance, we have a number of unintelligible, apparently meaningless word groups which cannot be understood at all without the help of a voluminous commentary, which, after all, may not represent properly what was really meant by the writer of the sutras. The extreme instance of this sutra style is provided by the Astadhyayi, or 8 chapters, or sutras of grammar by Panini, which makes almost an impossible reading, which make almost an impossible reading for the uninitiated. The desire for brevity weighed so much with the Indian mind that for saving one word, as regarded as a great reason for joy, than even the birth of a son. Okay, so that was my point in quoting that. Fortunately, the sutras of Badarayana, with which we are here concerned, are much more intelligible and much less brief, especially as there are no technical terms, sangyas, sangya prakaranam, or sangya means definition. So technical jargon, technical definitions, or technical terms, sangyas, and canons of interpretation, or paribhashas. Paribhasha would be a rule. So, for example, that a general rule, a particular rule might supersede a general rule. So there might be a general rule that you have to give all priests dakshina, or payment in a sacrifice, but there might be a particular rule about a particular sacrifice that says, in this case, you don't give some payment to the priest or something like that. Or there might be a rule that a later instruction supersedes a previous instruction. So this would be an example of a paribhasha. So there are sangyas, definitions of jargon, and there are paribhashas, specially created for this service. So what he's saying is, we find in some of these other sutra works, like Panini's grammar or some of the other sutra literature, particularly Jaimini's Karmakanda sutras, the Dharma sutras. We find a lot of these technical terms or definitions and paribhashas or rules for interpretation. So and they're especially created for the purpose of understanding those sutras and not perhaps any other sutras. Still, they are in themselves quite sufficient to give rise to a number of interpretations. So even though the Vedanta sutras don't have so much of that going on as some of the other sutra works, still there's enough of the technical differentiation in technical terms and rules of interpretation to allow for multiple interpretations of Vedanta sutras, which is what he's dealing with here in this book. So nothing will give a better idea of what a sutra is like than the traditional definition of a sutra quoted by the great dualistic Vedantin Madhvacharya in his introduction to his commentary on the sutras in question. So this is very nice, okay? So it runs like this. Albaksharam Albaksharam means less of letters, right? Digdam Saravadvishva Tomukam Asto Bhamanavadyam Cha Sutram Sutra Viduhu. So this is page 10 from Madhvabhasya, edited by Sensalrai Pale at Madras in 1900. So this is what it means. A sutra should contain as few letters as possible. It should be decisive, not leaving any doubts as to what it means. It should contain the essence. It should be comprehensive on the topic it touches. It should not contain any explanations or supplementary syllables, as for instance, in a chant or song, and it should be free from any fault. So it's a pretty demanding definition here. So one cannot help remarking here that the second of these conditions, that is, not leaving any doubt, is hardly fulfilled by any of the sutra collections available, and that the adjective Vishvatomukam, if understood to mean omni-faced or universally faced, right, is capable of being interpreted in the sense of ad libitum, so with taking liberties, right? It is best applicable to many of these sutras, right? So Vishvatomukam, could mean giving a definite meaning, but here it could also be interpreted to mean giving many meanings. So besides this very nature of the sutra literature in general, there are several reasons which facilitate the putting of different interpretations on the individual sutras and the deducing of different systems from the collections as a whole. Thus, for instance, it's very difficult to decide which sutras contain the Purva Paksha, right, or the prima facie view, the initial view, which is the wrong view, which is put forward at the beginning of an adhikarana or an argument or a particular subject, and which is the Siddhanta or the author's view, or the culmination of the subject with the right view. So thus in Pada 3 of Adhyaya 2, Adhikarana 13, Sutras 19 to 28, are interpreted by Shankara as representing the Purva Paksha view, according to which the jiva is anu, the soul is minute or atomic in size, while Sutra 29 formulates the Siddhanta, that is, that the jiva or the soul is not really atomic, right? But or anu, but that it is actually all-pervading, or Vibhu, right? The Supreme Soul is Vibhu, the Paramatman is Vibhu, the Jivatman is Anu. So, but according to Shankara, that is the Purva Paksha, that the soul is Anu, or infinitesimal atomic. And the actual Siddhanta, or the truth, is that the soul is all-pervading. The soul is Brahman. The soul is Brahman, the individual soul. So, and that in certain scriptural passages, it is spoken of as being Anu only because of the internal organ, right? Its internal subtle organ, manas, or the mind, which forms an essential condition of the individual soul as distinguished from the higher self. Thus, the anutva, or the smallness, the atomicness, the infinitesimalness, right, which really belongs to manas, or the mind, has only been transferred to the jiva, or the soul. So, in other words, he's saying that Shankara explains away the first passage, the first sutra, that is sutra, which one? The first one, sutras 19 to 28, say that the soul is infinitesimal. So he explains that away. On the other hand, right? On the other hand, probably all the other commentators would disagree, and they would say that's not the Purva Paksha, that's not the prima facie view, but that is the actual Siddhanta, that the soul is infinitesimal. On the other hand, Ramanuja interprets the first sutra, 2.3.19 of the Adhikarana, as stating the Siddhanta view, according to which the individual soul is of minute size, and sutras 20 to 25 are interpreted by him, Ramanuja, as only confirming this view and refuting objections raised against it, while the remaining sutras deal with another question concerning anutva, or infinitesimalness, minuteness. We see here how the same set of sutras can be interpreted as lending support to two views, diametrically opposed to each other, on an essential point of the doctrine. It's very important to understand this before we, get into it. There is another circumstance tending in the same direction. There is a traditional division of the sutras into adhyayas, or chapters, and padas, or sub-chapters handed down to us, on which there is unanimity of opinion. Okay, so everybody agrees that there are 4 chapters. Everybody agrees that there are different padas, or different sections to those chapters. No such division, however, of adhikaranas, or topics, right, unanimously accepted, has come down to us. Thus, for instance, in connection with sutras 41, 42, 43 of the third pada of the first adhyaya, Sutra 41 forms one adhikarana, deciding that the ether, which reveals names and forms spoken of in Chandogya Upanishad 8.14.1, is Brahman, and it is neither the elemental ether nor the jiva, while sutras 42 and 43 form another adhikarana, another subject, teaching that the Vijnana Maya, he who consists of knowledge, mentioned in Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad 4.3.7, is not the individual soul, but is the supreme Brahman. According to Ramanuja and Nimbarka, the three sutras form but one single adhikarana, which establishes that the akasha, the ether, in the passage in question cannot refer to the individual soul, nor even to the released individual soul, because even then the individual soul continues to be different from Brahman. So the akasha, or ether, must mean Brahman, the supreme Brahman, and nothing else. According to Madhva, on the other hand, the 3 sutras are 3 separate adhikaranas, or 3 separate subjects. Sutra 41 referring to akasha, ether. Sutra 42 referring to Vijnana Maya, or what did he translate it as? He who consists of knowledge, right? And Sutra 43 referring to another passage in Brihad Aranyaka 6.4.22, where the words Sarvasya Dipati Sarvasyeshanaha, Lord of all, the ruler of all, refers to Vishnu, or the Lord. So here, to sum it up here, we have Ramanuja and Embarka saying also talking about the individual soul, even is an individual even in liberation, and Madhva also agreeing with that. But Madhva, instead of saying that all these three sutras are one topic, Madhva makes it into three topics. So the necessity to have having to supply words to complete the meaning of a sutra is another prolific source of variety of interpretations. So sometimes commentators will add a word here and there to give the full interpretation. So, for example, in Sanskrit, we can say gachami, I go, right? I go. The word I is inherent in the ending ami, right? So gachami means I go, like that. But to be more emphatic, or to supply the hidden I, right? We would say aham gachami, aham gachami. So we might say I am gajaha. This is an elephant, but the words are only this, I am, and gajaha, elephant. The word is bhavati or asti is not supplied, it's hidden. So a commentator who wanted to give the sentence in full would say, I am gajaha asti, I am gajaha bhavati, that this is an elephant, actually supplying the hidden or the understood verb to be. So here we see that the Sutrakaras, the people who have written the commentary, not the Sutrakaras, the commentators, the Bhashyakaras, the people who have made the commentaries, sometimes will add some words to explain, to give the full meaning of the sutra, because the sutra is made so short that many words are to be understood. Some words may be understood. So he gives an example of this. Thus, in Sutra 1, Pada 3 of Adhyaya 2, na viyad ashrutehe, literally, not the ether, because of want of scriptural mention, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva supply the word utpadyate, is produced, while Madhva supplies the word anutpattimat, is not produced, right? So we could say that this completely changes the meaning. Madhva completely changes the meaning by supplying this opposite, verb here. So some particular words in the sutras have two meanings, a circumstance which also leads to different interpretations. Thus, the word antara in Sutra 2, 3:15 may mean both in the midst, madhya, and without, vina. Shankara, Ramanuja, and Nimbarka accept the first meaning, and thus the sutra, according to them, means that the mention of vijnana, right, or intelligence, right, and manas, mind, right, in the midst of the passage refer to the creation of the elements. Referring to the creation of the elements need not disturb the order of creation. While, according to Madhva, who accepts the second meaning, that is vina or without, right, the sutra means that the opposite order of destruction is that of creation, and holds good except in the case of vijnana and manas, or intelligence and mind. So the idea here is this particular adhikarana, this particular subject, is about the order of creation, the order of elements in creation come from one another, right? 1, 2, 3, right? And then in destruction, the order should be reversed. But what Madhva is saying here is Madhva saying that yes, they're reversed, but except for these two, intelligence and mind, those are not reversed. So another circumstance is the fact that there is no padapata. Okay, so there are different, or record of separate words singularly in the sutras handed down by an authoritative tradition, as there is for one of the Samhitas, for the Samhita of the Rig Veda or other Vedas, which leads no doubt regarding the splitting of the metrical line into separate words. Okay, so this is a problem which is almost completely unique to Sanskrit, is that there's a thing called sandhi, by which are rules, phonetical rules, by which words are put together, and sometimes a Sanskrit sentence or paragraph or even a whole book can be written in one word. It's in one word in the sense that there is no break between the writing of the word, like that. So how do we break the words up? How do we break up the words in Sanskrit? That there are certain rules for that, but different interpretations can come about by breaking words in different places. For example, the word Vedanta itself can be broken up as Veda and Anta. Veda plus Anta makes Vedanta. So Anta, we discussed, means the end, and Veda means knowledge. So Vedanta can mean the end of all knowledge. But if we break the word Vedanta in a different place, Ve and Danta, the word Danta means teeth, and Ve means without. So Vedanta can also mean without teeth. So it can have a completely different meaning when you break it in different positions, in the Sanskrit words in a different position. So here he's saying that there are different ways of reciting Sanskrit prose and poetry, or slokas or verses, and when we have a text, usually we when we chant it straight through the way was written, either prose or poetry, it's called samitapat. That is just the way it's meant to be. Pata means recitation, so samitapat means as written, chanted as written, or spoken as written, or read as written. So then there's another form called padapat, where we break up the words. In the Vedas, when people learn the Vedas, they not only learn to recite the Vedas all the way through the way they're written, but they also learn to break the words properly. So there are texts that are set out which give us the proper breaks in the words in the Vedas, but there is no text, and that is called padapat. Right? So we have Isa Vasyam Idam Sarvam. Isa Vasyam Idam Sarvam, 4 words. So that gets broken up. So sometimes we might have a difference in Sandhi so we might say te pi. So te pi means te api. Te api becomes te pi because of the Sandhi rule. So when we say it, we say te pi. But when we break it, we say te api. Like that. Or namo namaha, namaha namaha, namaha namaha together when becomes namo namaha. If we break it, we get namaha namaha. When we put it together, the sandhi means that the namaha first namaha becomes namo, and the next one is namaha, namo namaha. Right. So this is different. Samitapat will be namo namaha. Padapat will be namaha namaha. Okay. So for example. So this is an example. So in the sutras, we have no padapat. We have no word for word. If we read, for example, Bhaktivedanta Swami's books, they always put the word for word. The word for words are very important, especially in the sutras, especially in the Vedas, especially in other texts. The different words are important because some other person may come along and take the original form of the Bhagavatam or the Gita or the Vedanta Sutras in this case, or even the Vedas, and try to break them in a different way and get a different interpretation, therefore, from it. So, for example, the Sutra 2.3.26 is read as Guna Dvalokavat, right? But or it can also be read as Guna Dva Lokavat, right? With a break between those two S-like figures here are called avagrahas or apostrophes. They show that the letter A has been taken out from the second word, the beginning of the second word. So guna dva lokavat, right? But in the first one, guna dva lokavat, right? So both readings are equally admissible, as the words are not usually separated in manuscripts, right? Because manuscript writers in Sanskrit, they would just keep writing and no breaks, because they have a manuscript and they want to try to fit as much in as many letters on a page in a line as possible, right? So we have this example in modern word processing. We have two ways that we can put text on a line. One way is we can justify it, where we format it so it looks nice, or the other way where we can just try and get as many letters on the line where it's left justified because we're writing left to right. So if it's left justified, we get more letters on the line than if we justify it where the spaces are sometimes adjusted to make it look nice. So what they're saying here is they try to get everything, as much information on a line as possible. And therefore there may not be a break in the script between different words. So according to Shankara, the sutra means, the sutra which we're talking about up here, 2.3.26, Guna Dvalokavat, means that the jiva, though of minute size, anu, can be affected in any part of the body, owing to the pervasiveness of the quality of intelligence, so that the soul pervades the body through with intelligence, and it's not the actual soul that is in every part of the body, right? The soul is in one part of the body, and through its intelligence pervades the body with feeling. So as is, for instance, the case of certain objects in the world, lokavat. Lokavat means in the world, right? So, or of the world. So, for example, with the light of a lamp, the actual light spreads everywhere. When we turn the light on, the light actually spreads everywhere. According to Ramanuja, Nimbarka, and Madhva, however, alokavat, right, which is different. So in Sanskrit, we have this word up here, lokavat. If we add a long a to a Sanskrit in the beginning as a prefix to a Sanskrit word, it means the opposite of what the word was before it had the long a added to the beginning. So lokavat means in the world. Alokavat means like the light. Gives the illustrations wanted for the purpose more directly. So according to Ramanuja, Nimbarka, and Madhva, this sutra has those little lines here, these avagrahas, which mean that there's a long a, which is left out here. But whereas Shankara takes it to be written like this, without those little S-like Devanagari avagrahas, which means that there is no long a there. So anyway, that's just an example. So the fact that the Upanishadic passages under discussion are not actually mentioned in the sutras must also be considered in this connection. So we don't actually have in the sutras themselves, because they're trying to make the sutras very small, the actual quotations from what Upanishad they're talking about. So we have to guess when the Brahma Sutras are saying something, what Upanishads are they referring to? And this is where the commentators come in. They supply the passages in their purports, in their commentaries. They supply the passages from the different Upanishads to prove what the sutra means. The fact that the Upanishad passages under discussion are not actually mentioned in the sutras must also be considered in this connection. Different commentators may take up for discussion different passages, and thus one and the same adhikarana or discussion may yield quite a different meaning. For example, in Sutra 115, the passage referred to by Shankara, Ramanuja, and Nimbarka is from Chandogya Upanishad 6.2, 1 and 2. And the sutra means that the sat, or the eternal, in the passage, the word sat, or meaning eternal, in the passage cannot mean the pradhana means a conglomerate of material energies, right, of the Sankhya's. The Sankhya's are the, Sankhya means counting, so more or less the scientific, logical school that tries to understand how material nature evolved, right? Because of the act of willing is spoken of in connection with it, right? So it cannot mean the pradhana. the Sankhya's because the act of willing is spoken of in connection with it, right? And thus the whole Adhikarana, beginning with this sutra, is an attempt to show that the passage which the Sankhya brings forth in support of his doctrine cannot but refer to Brahman, right? If only properly interpreted with a due consideration of context. Okay, so what the meaning here would be, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Nimbarka. Shankara, of course, is a follower of Vivartavad, and meaning there is no real transformation of Brahman into the souls in the world. But Ramanuja and Nimbarka believe that in Parinamavad, which means there is a real transformation of Brahman into the souls in the world. So, but in any case, all Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva all believe in the transformation of Brahman in some way, right? Where and that is the creation of the world appears from a transformation of Brahman, right? So that is against what Madhva believes, because Madhva does believe that the Brahman or the Supreme Brahman is the cause of the world, but not the material cause, only the efficient cause. So in technical terms, he believes they all believe, all four of them believe that Brahman is the nimitta karana, or the efficient cause, but not the material cause, that the material of Brahman doesn't create the world and the souls. So down here he's going to say how Madhva would disagree with that, because he believed that the Brahman is the upadan karana. But Madhva interprets the adhikarana in quite a different way. The passage in question, according to him, is Prashna Upanishad 5.5, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad 6.4.23, etc., in which the Atman or the Jiva, the individual, right, or Purusha, is spoken of as something to be seen or meditated upon, and the sutra accordingly means that Brahman cannot be said to be ashabda or inexpressible, avachya, right? So sometimes certain philosophers, Buddhists and Advaitins, followers of Shankara, Mayavadis, they'll say this, that the Supreme cannot be described by words. What they mean to say is it cannot fully be described by words, but which is accepted by pretty much everybody, but that it cannot be described by words at all. So ashabda means not no word or no sound, and avachya means it cannot be described, it cannot be enunciated. So because it is described as being something to be seen or known, ikshaniya nyeya. So Madhva's making a highly technical argument here and saying it can't be expressed, it's inexpressible, right, or indescribable, but it can be perceived through the mind or through the sense of seeing. So it can be seen or known. So, and all the remaining sutras of the Adhikarana are explained accordingly. So Madhva is going in a completely different direction here. Thus, we see how very easy it is that the collection of sutras before us have been interpreted in more than one way. In fact, there have been 5 different commentaries on them. Well, there's more than 5. There's more than 5. There's, of course, Baladev Vidyabhushan's Gaudiya commentary, but there's also Srikanta's commentary, Shaiva Vishishtadvaita commentary. So there are other commentaries also, but they're just less well known than the most well known, of course, is Shankara's. Second most well known is Ramanuja's. The third is Madhva's, and these are the three basic different approaches. And we have here we're talking about 5 because we're including Nimbarka and Vallabha. So 5 different schools have tried more or less successfully to derive their doctrines from these sutras, and each have even gone so far as to show that his particular system is the only one that the author of the sutras wanted to communicate through them, in spite of all these circumstances contributing to the variety of interpretations. The question still remains, why is it this particular sutra collection, which has had the privilege of attaining so many interpretations put upon it, so as to give rise to not less than 5 different, well, multiple different doctrines, differing from each other as regards some essential dogmas. So there are similar sutra collections. For instance, the Vaisheshika Sutras of Kannada, to explain the Vaisheshika school of philosophy, commented upon by Prashashtapada, the Nyaya Sutras of Gautama, with a commentary on by Vatsayana, right, who's the famous author of the Kama Sutras, right? The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, commented on by Vyasa himself, right? The Purva Mimamsa Sutras, or the Kamakanda Sutras, right, of Jaimini, with a commentary by Shabara Swamin. And we find everywhere that each sutra collection has only one authoritative commentary or bhashya. Though the systems of philosophy represented by these sutra collections may have, and as a matter of fact, they have actually, in some cases, branched off into different subvarieties, retaining some common points, but at the same time differing on some points, not always unessential. Still, there is no difference of opinion as regards the particular doctrine represented by or supposed to be taught by the sutra collection in each case. So this is very interesting. The sutra collection before us does not differ materially from the other collections as regards to its literary character. Why then is it that an attempt should be made to find only one and the same one and the same sutra collection, 5 different, found on one and the same sutra collection, 5 different systems: the absolute monism of Shankara, the qualified monism of Ramanuja, the monodualism of Nimbarka, the dualism of Madhva, and the pure monism of Vallabha. It is not possible, of course, that the Sutrakara should have more than one system in his mind. It is difficult to answer the question positively or satisfactorily, and we can only offer a guess here. As said above, it is the Vedanta that claims to be derived exclusively from the Upanishads, and that sets the authority of the Upanishads over everything else, even reasoning. Although seeds of other systems may be traced in the Upanishads, still no other system ever cared for them except in a casual or secondary manner. Some even directly condemned them. Much less did any of them try to reconcile the evidently contradictory passages and to deduce one consistent system from them. This was mainly the task of the Vedanta, and the 5 systems before us are the results of 5 such attempts at deducing a system from the Upanishads. The main question before them may be briefly stated thus: there are certain passages in the Upanishads which emphatically assert a unity and deny a plurality. Tattvamasi aham brahmasmi sarvakam vedam brahma tajjalaniti shanta upanishad upasita tajjalan yitjasanta upasita. Okay. By the side of these, there are other passages that clearly assert plurality and a duality between the higher self and the individual self. And I won't quote all of those, but they're quoted from Shvetashvatara Upanishad 1.9 and Mundaka 3.1.1. How to reconcile these? Shankara would say that all plurality is illusion, while unity is the only reality, and that all passages referring to plurality have in view only the phenomenal existence or the popular conception of the universe, which is, however, ultimately meant to be refuted. Ramanuja would say that both unity and plurality are real, and that the individual souls in the animate world, though really and inherently different in nature from the Supreme Soul, are at the same time non-different from him, in that they cannot have an existence independent of the Supreme Self. Thus, the chit and achit, or the animate and inanimate worlds, are the body and thus the attributes of the Supreme Self. According to Nimbarka, also, both difference and non-difference are real. Without the individual souls and the inanimate world being the distinguishing attributes of the Supreme Self, as there is nothing else from which to distinguish it. Madhva, on the other hand, denies unity altogether and holds that duality is the only reality, and that all affirmations of unity are only for the sake of upasana, or meditation. Nay, even the sentence tat tvamasi, he reads as atat tvamasi, and not so tat tvamasi means that thou art. So he says that thou art not. So Balaba, without believing in Maya or the principle of illusion, holds that the individual soul in its pure and pristine nature is identical with the Supreme Soul. So thus, there are 5 systems. These 5 systems may be supposed to have come into existence in the course of the attempts to reconcile and to deduce a system that from the apparently contradictory passages of the Upanishads. So we have a let's see, a comment here. And Swami Narayans have a new one. Yes, that's true. The sutras also represent such an attempt independently made by Badarayana, and other similar attempts must have preceded it. For instance, those of Kasakritsnya, Ashmarata, Varsyayani, and others. Somehow or other, the sutras of Badarayana came to survive all the rest and to possess a high reputation, so that every Vedantist came to look upon them as the most authoritative source of his doctrine, next in importance to the Upanishads only. One can very well believe it to be very probable that all these 5 systems in their essential elements must have existed long before the sutras of Badarayana attained to prominence, and that when there arose great teachers like Shankara and Ramanuja and Nimbarka and Madhva, they thought it their first duty for the propagation of their system to write a commentary or bhashya on these sutras, and to prove that the sutras, which are reputed as teaching the kernel of the Upanishads, contain none but their own doctrines. In doing this, they naturally proceeded to interpret the sutras in the light of their own doctrines, and resorted to all sorts of twistings and artificialities to make the sutras yield the sense they wanted. They had their own doctrine cut and dry before them, and their only task was to show that it had the authority of the sutras. Naturally, they never cared to know what was the real and natural meaning of the sutras. These facts are too transparent to anyone who would just cursorily glance over the several bhashyas. These facts are too transparent to anyone who would just cursorily glance over the several bhashyas to require special emphasis. Now, the question before us is, which of these bhashyas gives an interpretation of the sutras which is the most faithful to the original? In other words, which of the 5 systems, if there is any at all, is the one taught by the sutras or professed by their author? Perhaps we might not be able to arrive at a positive conclusion to the effect that such and such system is the one taught by the sutras. Perhaps the system in mind of the Sutrakara was different from the 5 we're considering. But still, the inquiry is useful, even if we can say that one of the 5 commentaries is a more natural or correct interpretation of the sutras than the rest, or that all the sutras alike do not favor any one particular system. The method of interpretation which we are going to apply to the sutras in our inquiry is the critical one, as opposed to the traditional method applied by several commentators. For any piece of literature can be interpreted in 2 ways, either by the traditional or by the critical method. The former takes the doctrine for granted and proceeds from this assumption to find the doctrine in the work under examination. For instance, take the Bhagavad Gita. Every school of Vedanta appears to attempt to find its own system in it, shutting its eyes to all contradictory passages, or more often, trying to interpret them in a far-fetched manner, so as to confirm their own doctrine. Shankara, while commentating upon the work, would find nothing but the reality of Brahman and the illusory character of the universe in it. And all passages referring to a personal God and his devotees, which are therefore theistic in nature, would be interpreted as having to do with the lower form of knowledge or the lower form of Brahman, apara Brahman or apara Vidya. Ramanuja would find nothing but bhakti in it. In all these cases, the interpreter has, to a certain tradition coming down from the years of before, and he moves away from the groove where he moves away from the groove. He moves always in the groove where he has once placed himself. On the other hand, the critical method presupposes an attitude of absolute impartiality, considering the work by itself without any leaning to any one particular doctrine. Of course, mistakes may often be committed in applying this method, and very ridiculous conclusions may sometimes be arrived at, owing to insurmountable prejudices due to birth, race, and other surroundings, or owing to want of patience or lack of sufficient material to go upon. Thus, again, to take the instance of the Bhagavad Gita, one German scholar professing to apply the critical method to it came to the conclusion that the work was purely theistic, and that all the verses which contained pantheistic ideas were later additions. But recently, a distinguished Indian scholar has shown by detailed and thoroughgoing study of the Gita that not one verse can be regarded as a latter addition or as being out of place or context, that everything as it is already there fits in most smoothly in its context, and that the chief teaching of the Gita refers to neither this nor that particular system of Vedanta, but that it is entirely practical and Catholic in its nature. It can be summarized in one word, thus: Jnana Purvaka, Bhakti Pradhana, Nishkama, Karmanustana, the performance of one's duty without any attachment to reward, proceeding from devotion to the Lord, backed by right knowledge. The same may be illustrated from the history of the Vedic interpretation. Shayana is the person who has commented on the Vedas. So we have only the comment. We have Madhva did a commentary on some of the Rig Veda, but apart from that, the person who commented on the actual Veda Samhitas and things is Shayana. So Sayana's method is mostly one-sided, not caring for consistency or the ordinary canons of interpretation. Roth, on the other hand, I'm not familiar with him, went to the other extreme in condemning Shayana downright and proposing sometimes quick, fanciful explanations. Later on, Geldner and Pischel have struck the golden mean, and they have come to find some explanations in Shayana which are correct and ingenious and based on quite sound reasons. This critical method, as opposed to the purely traditional one, was not unknown to the Sanskrit writers, especially in the domain of philosophy. The Mimamsikas, right, when he's talking about Mimamsika, there's Purva and Uttara Mimamsa. We're talking about, when we say Mimamsa, we usually talk about Purva Mimamsa or Karmakanda, right? So the Mimamsikas, whose special province it was to lay down the canons of interpretation, have briefly summarized the essentials of this method in the following verse. So here's the verse. The quotation is: the beginning, the end, the repetition, the novelty, the object, the glorification, and the argument. These are the canons of determining the purport. Thus, for instance, in determining the purport of the 6th chapter of the Chandogya Upanishad, All these can be illustrated. That the chapter mainly teaches the unity of the Supreme Self follows from the beginning, Ekam Eva Advitiyam, so one only, the one only without a second, Chandogya Upanishad 6.2.1. From the close also, all this has it for the soul, Chandogya Upanishad 6.8.7. There is a repetition of the same idea throughout the chapter that, for example, the phrase Tatvamasi occurs there 9 times, that thou art. There is a novelty here in the unity of the soul, in that the unity of the soul can be known from this and from no other proof. The object of the knowledge of the unity of the self is also mentioned here. So, for example, a man who has got a teacher knows he has to wait just until he is freed from the body, and then he becomes one with Brahman. Chandogya 6.14.2. Thus it is taught at the attainment of Brahman is the fruit of the knowledge of the entity without a second. There is also the eulogizing of the unity thus, quote, "You have asked me that instruction by hearing which what is not heard is heard, and what is not thought is thought. What is not known is known." Chandogya 6.1.3. Arguments establishing the same are also stated in several places. Quote, "Just as by knowing one lump of clay, all that consists of clay, which would become known. The product depends only on name, and it is a name, while clay alone is the reality." Chandogya 6.1.4. A cursory glance at the Bhashya will show how often this method is employed in determining the meaning of any particular word in an Upanishad passage. As one instance among many, one may refer to the first adhikarana, or first topic, right, in the 4th pada of the first adhyaya, where in determining what the expression avyakta, the underdeveloped, means in Katha Upanishad 1, 3, 10, 11, all these canons have been applied. Before proceeding to the critical examination of the sutras, as proposed above, we must be on our guard not to confound the question before us with another allied to it, but quite different from it. That is, which of the 5 systems of Vedanta is the most elevated and conducive to the satisfaction of the human impulse for the quest for truth? So this is not exactly what he's looking at, right? But this is what some people will try to think. So it is of course very difficult to pronounce judgment as to which philosophical system is more profound and stands the test of reason better than any other. Every system has its merits and demerits, and its advocates and opponents. Perhaps if philosophy mainly concerns itself with finding unity in plurality, nothing may be higher than the absolute monism of Shankara. And nowhere else can we see human understanding reaching such heights of elevated thought. But we are not concerned with this point of view at all. The question before us is one purely of literary criticism and not of philosophy proper. Here is a literary product before us, and here we have so many interpretations of it. And our object is to see which of these, if any, has faithfully represented the natural and straightforward meaning of the original, apart from the inherent philosophical value of the doctrines propounded by them. The Brahma Sutras of Badarayana are divided into 4 chapters, or adhyayas, each of which are again divided into 4 padas, or quarters. The sutras, though they appear to be unconnected from the point of view of their external form, are not really so. They are pervaded by a system running through all of them. The first adhyaya is called Samanyavadhyaya, or the chapter that mainly seeks to establish that all the Upanishads deal with Brahman as their final aim. The first part of the first adhyaya states first, in general terms, that Brahman is the highest object of knowledge, and that from it proceeds birth, preservation, and destruction of the universe. So that is stated in Taittiriya Upanishad, Yatova imani bhutani jayante, yena jatani jivanti, yaprayanti abhisham vishanti. That from which everything emanates, that by which everything is maintained, and that into which everything enters is Brahman, right? Like that. So this is what he's saying here. The scriptures alone being the means of knowledge of it, right? Shastra Yonitvat is the sutra which we get in the first Adhikarana, the first adhyaya, the first part, right? It's very near the beginning. That the scriptures are the means of knowing it, and that Brahman alone, being their final aim, then discusses certain Upanishad passages in detail. A doubt is raised about them as to whether they necessarily refer to Brahman or may refer to something else, the pradhana, right, meaning the conglomerate of material nature of the Sankhya's, or the individual soul, or some deity. But they, at the same time, contain clear and unmistakable indications of Brahman, spasta Brahma, lingani. So lingani means indications or, right, so spasta Brahma lingani, right. The second and third parts also deal with similar passages, which, however, contain only indistinct indications of Brahman, aspasta Brahmalingani. The fourth pada more particularly deals with those passages in which certain words are apparently interpreted by the Sankhya's as referring to some of their principles, like the pradhana or the mahat, which again also means the conglomerate of material nature, right, before it breaks off and becomes individual evolutes, like the individual creation of the individual elements. But these are proved to refer to some categories connected with the Vedanta. The fourth pada thus contains the polemics specially directed against the Sankhya's. After having so far established that Brahman alone is the object of which the Upanishads refer, the Sutrakara, Badarayana Vedavyasa, in the second adhyaya, second chapter, right, which is called Aviroda Adhyaya, right, Aviroda, the chapter dealing with the absence of contradiction, which proceeds to show that nothing can be brought forth which would contradict the fact established so far that the systems of Vedanta refer to Brahman and to Brahman only. In the first part of the second adhyaya, all objections based on Shmritis, right? Shmriti Shastras like Idihasa Purana and other Shmriti works, like those of the Sankhya's, claiming to contain passages of the opposite purport, as well as those based on purely speculative reasoning, are answered. After having thus defended the Vedanta doctrine against the attacks of contradictory Shmritis and speculative arguments, Nyaya, meaning logic, right, the second pada aims at refuting the other doctrines than Vedanta. Such other doctrines as the Sankhya, Nyaya, and Buddhism and so forth, by the very weapons of speculative arguments, which are their forte, are their best quality. So the greatest quality. The third pada tries to reconcile the passages apparently contradicting each other regarding the creation of the different elements and the essential characteristics of the individual soul, while the fourth pada, this is of the second adhyaya, right, similarly deals with those passages that refer to the vital airs and the sense organs. The third adhyaya is called Sadhana Adhyaya, the chapter dealing with the means of attaining to absolution. The first part of the second adhyaya, in particular, deals with the manner of the transmigration of the individual soul and inculcates vairagya, or aversion to the world, by means renunciation or aversion to the world, by describing the misery involved in it. The second pada discusses the different conditions of the individual soul, that is, the state of being awake, that of dreaming, and that of deep sleep. The third and fourth padas deal with the different kinds of meditations enjoined as leading to moksha, and attempts to reconcile the contradictions and to fill up the discrepancies regarding them. The fourth adhyaya, right, the fourth chapter, the last chapter, is called Phala Adhyaya. Phala means fruit, right? So the chapter dealing with the fruit of knowledge, the salut, the first pada of the fourth chapter right, more particularly deals with what is called Jivan Mukti, that is absolution in this very lifetime. The second pada discusses the way of passing away of a knowing soul. And the third and fourth padas deal with the condition of the released soul. Each of the 16 padas, right, 4 padas in each chapter, in each adhyaya, so 16 padas, consists of a number of adhikaranas, or sections dealing with one and only one topic or subject. The method of treating a topic in each such adhikarana is also very systematic. First, the subject or the matter of discussion, vishaya, is stated. Then comes a statement of doubt, or several alternatives are proposed, of which one is to be chosen ultimately, vishaya and samshaya. Next comes the statement of the prima facie view, the purvapaksha. Then follows the opposite view, the uttarapaksha. Then last comes the siddhanta, or the conclusion. Thus, the example in the first adhikarana of the third pada of the first adhyaya, the question is, who is meant in the passage, he in whom heavenly earth, etc., are all woven, know him alone to be the self, etc., right? Here is the vishaya meaning the subject, right? Does it mean vayu? Does it, or the pradhana, right, the conglomerate material nature, or the individual soul, or the highest Brahman, right? What does it mean? Here is the samshaya. That's the doubt, right? So he is vayu, or the individual soul, or anything, but Brahman says the objector. So the objector, the purva pakshin, right? He says it could be vayu, it could be the individual soul, it could be anything, but it's not. It doesn't mean Brahman. So no, it is only Ishvara, says the Siddhanta. It is only Brahman. It is only the Supreme. It is only God. This is the Uttarapaksha. This proves that the passage refers to nothing but Brahman, and that is the Siddhanta, right, at the end. So that's a good example. So after of the way each topic is systematically dealt with. So after these general remarks regarding the nature, the contents, the arrangement, and the method of treatment of the sutras, we now proceed to examine in detail the sutras and their interpretations by the 5 great commentators, Shankara, Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Madhva, and Vallabha. So I thought that was very, very good as an outline, as an introduction. He's covered all the bases of interpretation, about sutras, everything you wanted to know about how he's going to approach the subject, and now we're going to get more into the meat of the subject, the actual meat of the subject.
Om Namo Narayanaaya